North Wales, with some bright or sunny spells at times and 1 or 2 light showers too. Turning breezy along the north coast with highs here also around 15 Celsius. It'll stay dry for the East Midlands with sunny spells and light winds. Temperatures will peak at around the average for this time of year, that's around 16 Celsius. A pleasant autumn afternoon for East Anglia with some longer sunny spells and light winds, although it may be a touch breezier towards the coast. Highs of 16. Southern England will see a fine afternoon with sunny spells and light winds. Afternoon temperatures are likely to peak along the south coast with highs of 18 or 19 Celsius. Throughout the rest of the day, rain and stronger winds will continue southwards across the north of the UK. That's how the weather is shaping us up across the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson, on TV, radio and online. Today we will be discussing whether actor John Boyega's comments on only dating black women exposes the elite's hypocrisy on race. And we'll also discuss the next James Bond needing to be more in touch with his feelings, apparently. I'll be joined all show by political commentator Matthew Stadler, no less. But first, here's Ray Addison with the news.
Thank you, Father. Good afternoon. Coming up to 1 minute past 2, here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. With the Labour Party conference now well underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan and appeal to voters who are, as he says, sick and tired of soaring energy costs. He opened the conference with a tribute to the late Queen.
She knew that the country she came to symbolise is bigger than any one individual or institution. An example that taught us that whatever challenges we face, the value of service endures. And a reminder that the creativity, the hard work, the enterprise that defines this nation is as abundant now as it ever was.
Well, the Deputy Labour leader says Britain is at a crossroads as she addressed her party's annual conference earlier. During a lengthy speech, Angela Rayner vowed that Labour would raise economic standards by clawing back public money from those who failed to deliver for taxpayers. She outlined the party's plans for new rights for workers as well, announcing what she calls a fair work standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access. She also promised to pump money back into the pockets of local communities.
The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. A Labour government to unite this country through the darkest times ahead. A Labour government to hand power back to the people and the places that once powered Britain. And a Labour government that will always be on the side of working people.
To international news, and voting is underway in Italy in an election that could see the return of the country's most right-wing government since World War II and its first female prime minister. An alliance led by Giorgia Meloni called Brothers of Italy appeared on course for victory when the last opinion polls were published. However, support for the left-leaning Five Star Movement has picked up in recent days. Voting continues until around 10 p.m. UK time. A British fighter freed from Russian-backed forces has admitted that he didn't think he would survive his ordeal. Aidan Aslin told The Sun on Sunday he was beaten and stabbed during interrogation. He was sentenced to death alongside fellow Briton Sean Pinner, but released after 5 months last Wednesday. The Prime Minister is expected to relax immigration rules as part of plans to boost business growth. Employers have been calling for more migrant workers to be given UK visas due to labour shortages. It comes as the number of migrants crossing the English Channel this year passed 32,000. The Defence Secretary plans to spend at least £52 billion on Britain's military in response to Russian aggression. In his first interview since Liz Truss became Prime Minister, Ben Wallace said it will be used to grow Britain's armed forces. He told the Sunday Telegraph the 3% spending increase comes after decades, quote, defending against cuts. The Foreign Secretary will travel to Asia tomorrow as part of Britain's diplomatic tilt towards the region. The Foreign Ministry says James Cleverly will start his 3-day trip in Japan. He'll then head to South Korea before ending up in Singapore. He'll also attend the state funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe during the trip. COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting from Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions will remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power and a state of emergency has been declared, though there's been no reports of any injuries or deaths. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery.
There have been evacuation orders issued. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. There are reports of roads washed out and homes destroyed. We've all seen the images. This is a very powerful and dangerous storm.
And finally, a flotilla lit up parts of the River Thames in London last night as a tribute to the late Queen. As part of an installation called Reflections, 150 illuminated boats travelled from Albert Bridge to Tower Bridge. The Queen's row barge, Gloriana, rowed by Ben Fogle, was the centrepiece. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Father Calvin Robinson.
Thank you, Ray. Welcome to Real Britain with me, Father Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up on the show. This week, the Hollywood star John Boyega made his dating preference clear, saying, "I only date black." Boyega also touched on how finding love has become more of a focus in his life as he enters his 30s in the interview with British GQ. We'll debate whether it was right for him to say that in just a moment. Also, historian and author Dr. Zaria Masani will join me on the show to discuss the Indian Armed Forces and their plan to erase its colonial past. And it's been announced the suave spy James Bond, the man with a license to kill, will now be more in touch with his feelings. Even 007 is at risk of going woke now. That's what we're talking about in the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on all of these issues and anything else we're discussing. Please tweet me at GBNews, or you can email at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube. Stay tuned. Live not by lies, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. The hard left, or the woke, would have us all believe our own truths, that reality is subjective, and that we can define our own existence entirely, independently from the world around us. Of course, that is untrue, and we all know it. The truth is inherent. We feel it even when we can't articulate it, because there is a universal truth. However, these lefty liberals have persuaded us that we can create our own realities, and worse still, force everyone else to live in them. But can we really, or are these just fantasies? After all, we know that a man is an adult human male, and a woman is an adult human female, even if we don't express it in those terms. Babies and toddlers can tell the difference between a man and a woman, for goodness sake, even if they don't have the language to define it. So why are we allowing people to compel us to lie about such basic truths? To pretend that a man is a woman, or that a woman is a man? Upon glancing at the footage that is now in front of you, this infamous teacher in Ontario, basically, our basic moral instincts tells us that something's wrong. The wig, the oversized boobs, the erect nipples, the tight lycra shorts, and the fact that this person is working with children. When I worked as a teacher, my colleagues would be sent home for dressing like this. So why are we being told to ignore that feeling, to suppress it in the name of progress? What is our first priority, the trans debate or teaching children? Here we have a man dressing up as a woman. That's the first red flag. He's wearing massively inflated pretend boobs, the second red flag. Lycra shorts in school, the third, and fake nipples that give the impression of being erect. 4 major red flags there. And that's before addressing the problem of health and safety with all these prosthetics whilst operating machinery, teaching woodwork without PPE and all of that. Do we really want children to be taught this misogynistic impression of a woman? This fellow is exploiting political correctness laws to present himself as what is essentially a caricature of a woman, isn't it? It's not a real woman. How is this not gender appropriation? If he presented as an ethnic minority, we'd call it blackface and would frown upon it as cultural appropriation. So why is a grown man enabled to present as a woman without any criticism? Canadian law prevents criticism. The Ontarian Human Rights Code protects this individual more than it protects the children in his care, for goodness sake. Although many of you would say that this man has a right to be protected. I'm not attempting to target this individual personally, but what he represents. This isn't a man living as a woman. This is a man role-playing an avatar of a woman whilst exposing his nipples to children. What effect will this have on the development of the children in his class? Only time will tell. Where are the adults? The headmaster, governors, parents? Why is no one putting a stop to this, or at least removing their children from this environment? The government is complicit. The school is probably scared of getting sued under these ridiculous laws. And we've been told that it's kind to encourage people to be who they want to be. The charitable thing to do, though, would be to offer this man the relevant support that he clearly needs and to get back to concentrating on the students' education and their well-being. It's not possible to be in the wrong body because you are your body. Instead of playing along, we should encourage people to love themselves for who they are, because that's the way that God made them. We were made in the image of God, and mutilating that image is frankly an affront to God. I hope you can join me in praying for this bloke, and praying that we as a society find the strength to do our best to proclaim the truth. Now, speaking in a GQ magazine interview earlier this week, British-Nigerian actor and producer John Boyega revealed that he only dates black women, sparking controversy on Twitter with many users. This is because some people view Boyega's comments as hypocritical and contradictory. As Ada on Twitter said, John Boyega saying he dates only black women isn't a problem. Double standards is a problem. If a white actor said they only dated white women, many would not defend his right to have preferences. They would call him racist. The rules have to stay consistent, that's all. So does this show how deep the hypocrisy is, which lies in the heart of the elite when it comes to issues such as race? Joining me now to discuss this is activist and organiser of BLM protests, Iman Ayton, and political commentator Dominique Samuels. First of all, thank you both so much for joining me. I want to start with you, Iman. Try and keep it not too spicy. Is John Boyega a racist?
No, of course not. That's utterly ridiculous. No, he's not. So let's just start with laying it out there, okay? So this is about personal preferences, and personal preferences are influenced by many different factors, such as experiences, good, bad, and shared. Values, friends, family, and of course, cultural and societal norms. So let's just take all of that into consideration and use education as an example, okay? So if someone was educated from Eton, it's quite likely that they'll have preferences, and their attraction is likely to be towards someone that is educated. The likelihood of that individual finding someone who is, I don't know, has very little education, no job or career prospects, and is currently on universal credit, that's unlikely in terms of that level of education.
These things are so
okay, and that's due to the aforementioned factors. So the point I'm trying to make, Calvin, thank you very much, is that I think it's quite ludicrous to penalise someone because of their personal preferences. We're influenced by all of these factors that I mentioned.
All right, thank you. We'll come back to you. Dominique, is this a personal preference or is this racial discrimination?
Look, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's racial discrimination as such, because, you know, you can't attack someone for having a racial preference in terms of dating, because whether we like to admit it or not, I think we all have an overarching preference in terms of the people we'd like to date. The problem is that the world that John Boyega inhibits, which is the virtue signalling, Hollywood world, they would see that as racist if a white person had said it. So it opens up a whole question about what sort of standards are allocated for certain groups. I personally think based upon sort of their social justice points. With black people, they're allowed to openly state they only date one race. But when it comes to white people, or even, cis women or cis lesbian or a cis gay person, they're not allowed to state their actual preferences without being called a transphobe, without being called a racist, without being called a bigot. So John Boyega is allowed to have his preference, that's fine, but it does highlight a hypocrisy that runs deep at the heart of the social justice movement.
Okay, so you're both in agreement that it's not racial discrimination. Iman, if a white actor came out and said, I don't date black women, would you have an issue with that? Because it seems it's the hypocrisy that people are struggling with.
I agree. So I definitely agree. It's a different conversation. So firstly, let me start with saying that I don't believe in cancel culture. I think it prohibits anyone from growing and learning from their mistakes. Secondly, I think John Boyega's level of influence pales in comparison to Eurocentrism or hundreds of years of Eurocentrism, racism and colonialism. So I actually think that his opinion is a healthy balance. And thirdly, we have to take into account Eurocentrism, which answers Dominique's point. So, in terms of Eurocentrism, this is a viewpoint whereby European culture is looked upon favourably and biased against non-Western cultures. So when we take into account historical context, as well as the fact that black people are still having to contend with racism, the connotations and implications are different when a white person says it versus a black person. For me, this is as clear as day. So I'm hoping I shouldn't have to repeat myself. Surely we understand that point, right?
Oh, understanding and agreeing are two different things, though, Iman. Dominique, do you think that Eurocentrism is a problem in the European continent? Surely it should be the case that we are centred around our own interests, whether that be British history, European history. These are clearly predominant because we live in a predominantly European part of the world.
Yeah, I would say that. I think that's largely to do with the fact that our culture is very Western-centric, and that just does so happen to be largely white people. I think that's just a fact. But I think what we've seen in particularly pop culture, Hollywood culture, is that looking more racially ambiguous, looking more black, if you will, is viewed as more desirable, having bigger hips, having darker skin, having bigger lips, having curly hair. So I wouldn't say it's fair to say Eurocentrism still reigns supreme today. I think our beauty standards are actually changing to appreciate more black features. However, I think what Iman has conceded there is that she thinks that double standards are okay if they reflect her moral sentiment. And as long as we can...
Oh, I said Dominic. Oh, wow. Really? It's like
you are okay with hypocrisy if it serves your moral sentiment, then we can...
At what point did I say? At what point did I say?
Sorry,
Iman, we'll come back to you. Don't worry. We'll come back to you.
I explained the connotations and implications.
Iman, we will come back to you. Thank you. Dominic's turn to talk.
Let's not put words in my mouth, okay?
No, that's what you basically said. You've said double standards and hypocrisy are okay if they serve your moral sentiment or if you think they're morally justifiable. That's what you've just said. In my personal opinion, as someone who comes from a mixed race background, as Calvin's obviously mixed race, I do think the idea of singling out one race and saying you're not going to date any others. Bear in mind, these are millions and millions of people on the earth that look very, very different. I think that is, if we want to go to the raw meaning of the word racial discrimination, yes, it is. To say that you won't date any other race of people when there are loads on this earth that look very different, that is racial discrimination. Okay. If a white person had said, I only date white, I would think, sorry, and that is a bit weird that you would discriminate against other races of people on the basis of skin colour. And if a black person said it, I have the same opinion. In the rawest terms, without the moral connotations, it is discrimination.
All right, thank you, Dominic.
No,
Iman,
it's
would you like to come back to that?
No, it's not. It's not even in the slightest, Dominic. You got it completely wrong. So let me just finalise that point. I've already explained it to you. The connotations and implications are different due to the historical context, racism, colonialism, Eurocentrism. You have to take those things into account. So in terms of there being an imbalance, it's quite clear there is an imbalance because we live in the West, and so we are taught things and we experience things through the Eurocentric perspective. And so ultimately what I'm trying to say is if one individual has a personal preference that's probably influenced by education, experiences, family, friends, culture, and societal norms. Hold on a second, let me finish, please. So all of these factors influence someone's personal preference. Everyone is entitled to their personal preference because of all of those aforementioned factors. So John Boyega stating that he has a personal preference because of his culture, because of his experiences, because of his friends, because of his family, because of what he thinks or deems as attractive isn't racial discrimination. It's called a personal preference. And if you find it hypocritical, please bear in mind that we have had hundreds of years of Eurocentrism, colonialism, and racism. So the imbalance is already there. So in actual fact, John Boyega is trying to balance the current state of affairs.
I think you're conflating. Ladies, thank you.
You're using loads of words to repeat what I've just said, which is that you think discrimination is okay if in your mind it's morally justifiable. The moral justifiability.
What's discrimination? What's discrimination?
Let's not talk over each other. I've got one last question for you both, if you don't mind, please. Thank you, Iman. Thank you, Dominique. Now, one last question. Let's keep it short and sweet.
What's the definition of racial discrimination?
Ladies, the viewers have heard your stance. They'll make up their own minds.
Discrimination. You agree with me, babe?
What's the definition? What's the definition of racial discrimination, Dominique? Please tell us.
Discriminating against someone based on their race. Now, Iman, Dominique, thank you. Dominique. Iman, quick answer, please. Not a 5-minute answer. No. Would you date a white man?
To be honest with you, my preference is black men.
Okay, thank you.
But my preference is
Thank you. Dominique, would you date a white man?
Yes, I'd date a white man, I'd date a black man, I'd date a Chinese man, Asian man, whatever. I genuinely don't care.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I understand you've got very different perspectives, but the viewers will make up their own minds based on what you've said. So thank you very much. That was activist and organiser of BLM protests Iman Ayton and political commentator Dominique Samuels. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we'll be joined by historian and author Dr. Zaria Mansani, who will discuss the Indian Armed Forces' plan to erase its colonial past. But first, let's hear the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be turning cloudier and windier as a band of rain pushes in from the north. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and after a fine day, it'll be somewhat cloudier by this evening, but it will stay dry with rain not expected until tonight. A similar picture in the southeast and around London as well. The cloud will have increased through the afternoon, but it will be a dry end to the day. Whilst 1 or 2 showers are possible across North Wales, further south it will stay dry this evening, turning increasingly cloudy and windy though. That's how things are shaping up across the Midlands as well. Here there may be the odd shower towards the north, whilst further south it will be dry but cloud and winds will increase. Meanwhile, in the northeast of England, we can expect a largely cloudy and blustery end to the day. There's a chance of some showery rain, most likely further west, before heavier rain arrives later. By 7 p.m, the band of rain will have cleared northern Scotland. However, heavy rain will lay across southern Scotland, bringing some heavy rain here with strong winds as well. It'll also be a wet day, end to the day, for much of Northern Ireland as that rain spreads in. The cloudy, wet and windy weather means it will stay mild overnight. The band of rain will continue southwards, reaching southern parts by the end of the night, with showers in the north. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. In an attempt to distance itself from its colonial past, the Indian Army has launched a sweeping review into everything from uniforms to regimental insignias and military ceremonies, most of which date back to when India was part of the British Empire. This is part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's plan to Indianise national defence, which started earlier this month when the Indian Navy dropped the Cross of St George from its insignia. To discuss this, I am joined by the esteemed historian and author, Dr. Zaria Masani. Thank you very much for joining me, Doctor. First of all, could you tell us about the history of the Indian Army during the time of the British Raj and its history since Indian independence?
Well, the Indian Army was reconstituted after the mutiny of 1857, when some sections of it rebelled against the rule of the East India Company. Under the British state, which then took over from the East India Company in 1857, the army was reconstituted. It was greatly expanded in its composition from the Punjab, which supplied almost a majority of the troops who were considered martial races, Punjabi Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, and then, of course, the Gurkhas. So the focus of the army shifted from Bengal, which had been the initial rebellious part of the army, to the Punjab. And the army was hugely professionalized. It was always a conscript, it was always not a conscript army, a volunteer army, staffed by professionals who had for generations often been part of previous armies. So it was, in fact, in both world wars, as we remember them, it was the largest volunteer army in the world, numbering about 2 million people at its peak.
So in your honest opinion, should Britain be ashamed of its colonialisation of India? Its colonisation, rather?
No, I think, there were faults, there was racism, it wasn't institutionalised, but it was there. It wasn't perfect by any means, as no form of government is, but it was the best on offer to India at the time in the 18th and 19th centuries. It brought in huge institutional changes in terms of all the things that a modern economy and a modern nation state needed, including the army, which was, as I said, a hugely professionalized volunteer force with ranks which were completely taken over from British armed forces, named from the generals downwards. And they had what would be now considered colonial traditions of having messed together, having regimental silver, all sorts of emblems, which encouraged a certain esprit de corps. So it was an army which encouraged a huge amount of loyalty, both to the Raj, but also to the army itself and to particular regiments.
It seems quite political, what Prime Minister Modi is doing. Is there appetite for this amongst the population? Because from what I see from other former colonies, people would rather remain as strongly linked to the British Empire and the British Commonwealth as possible. Is that the case in India too?
What's happening in India is an appeal to very instinctive nationalism, which is to blame foreign rule for all the things that are wrong with India and have been for, the last half century. So the British are blamed for much of it. The Muslims, the Mughals, are blamed for the rest of it. And very little responsibility is taken by the Hindu majority in India, which has increasingly become the voice of Indian nationalism. So what we're seeing under Modi, which was different under the nationalism of the Congress party before, was a Hinduization, a saffronization, a religious aspect given to Indian nationalism.
Okay. I mean, it sounds shameful, really, using the past as an excuse for the present. But Dr. Zaria Masani, thank you so much for your time and that very thorough explanation. Cheers for that. Now, joining me in the studio to further discuss this topic is Matthew Stadlen himself. Matthew, how are you today?
Very good to see you. Yes, in very good health, thank you.
Thank you for joining me, and congratulations on the birth of your son.
Thank you very much. He's very sweet, and there's not a ginger hair in sight.
Oh, God bless. We were all praying for that for you. Now, what are your thoughts on this state of the Indian affairs that we were just discussing?
I'm no fan of Modi and his brand of Indian nationalism, which the doctor very eloquently just pointed out there. I think a lot of it is about being pro-Hindu and anti-Muslim, and I think it's very dangerous given there's a sizable Muslim population in India, and even if there wasn't. I don't think that the Indians, though, under Modi, are using the past as an excuse for the present. We can't escape the past.
That's what Modi's doing, isn't it?
We can't change the past, but we can embrace the present. And for Indian soldiers, as they were until relatively recently, to swear oaths to people who actually fought against heroes of Indian resistance is quite obviously absurd. One of the things that I learned during the 10 days of mourning for Her Majesty the Queen, and I was a massive fan of the Queen for her tireless and dignified service to this country. One of the things I learned, though, was just how raw for millions of people British colonialism still is. And
I'm not convinced
as a
by that.
British student growing up in England, I wasn't taught, and I'm Cambridge educated, first-class degree, I was not taught remotely enough about our imperialist past.
Yeah, but
and
everyone,
the
I have to
evils
hold
of
you up,
it.
sir, because everyone says that, Matthew. And the first thing is...
But they don't all say it. You don't say
A lot of people say this, the people who are arguing against this side, and they say, I wasn't taught it in school. First of all, how do you know you weren't taught it?
Because I was there.
No, but do you remember everything you were taught, is my point.
I remember what I wasn't.
You might not remember being taught it. Secondly, you might have been taught it quite poorly, which happens in a lot of schools across this country.
Why are you questioning whether I was taught it? I was there, Calvin.
Just because you were or weren't taught it doesn't mean it isn't being taught now as well, and that's a big part of the debate that gets lost behind. Because
where is your evidence that it is being taught?
The national curriculum. We can draw that up, obviously.
Let's draw it up in the break, because...
OK, because it's a major part of the curriculum.
There are people who are... I'm not old, I'm 42, right? Getting old.
Yeah.
And for people of my age, and I consider myself liberal-minded, not to have been made aware in school of the atrocities that were carried out in the name of my country, I think is very poor. I'll give you a personal example.
We don't have time for a personal example, but we'll come back to that.
OK.
All right, thank you, Matthew. I think you're wrong, but thank you for your perspective. You are with GB News on TV, radio and online, and next we'll be discussing 007 James Bond. We've been told the next Bond will be much more in touch with his feelings. Before that, it's time for a check on the news headlines with none other than the wonderful Ray Addison.
(2:33). Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. With the Labour Party conference underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan and appeal to voters who are struggling with soaring energy costs. The Deputy Labour leader says Britain is at a crossroads. As she addressed the party's annual conference earlier, Angela Rayner outlined Labour's plans for new workers' rights, announcing what she's calling a Fair Work Standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access. She also promised to, quote, pump money back into the pockets of local communities.
Just as we were in 1997, we're now at a crossroads. The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. The next Labour government will pump money back into the pockets of local communities, the people who built Britain.
COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting from Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions will remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power, and a state of emergency has been declared, though there's been no reports of any deaths. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Father Calvin will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News Channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News with me, Father Calvin Robinson. Now, the payment processor PayPal has suspended the Free Speech Union and activist Toby Young's accounts in a battle against what the company has dubbed misinformation. The suspension follows a number of suspensions of big tech companies, which has now left individuals not only just losing their social media accounts, but their ability to purchase products, to travel, and even withdraw their own money. With me now is Leah Helpern, social commentator and author of Undressing Bitcoin, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Leah, what do you make of this move, first of all, by PayPal?
I think it's really concerning. I mean, what's regarded as misinformation is constantly changing on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. Just a few months ago, if you said that the vaccines were safe and effective, if you said they weren't safe and effective, then you would be absolutely deplatformed. A few months later, we actually know, well, they're not that safe, and actually they're really not that effective. And so I think dialogue is very important in order to find out what the truth is. And since we're not allowed dialogue, it makes me assume that there must be a greater agenda at play. We're at a point where simply having the wrong opinion gets you banned.
What do you think that agenda is? What's the end goal here, Leah?
Well, the end goal is some form of control, whether it's absolute censorship. I think control is the absolute agenda. And, you know, attacking money is the best way to do it. Money is literally the fuel and the energy which fuels your life. And if you don't have freedom of money, if you don't have financial freedom, then you don't have freedom of anything. You're not allowed to voice your own opinion. And that is very concerning.
Matthew, would you agree that this is censorship of political opinions that they disagree with?
Yeah, I actually feel I feel quite uncomfortable about the idea of PayPal being the arbiters of what people can and can't say, although they are a business and so they're entitled to, I suppose. It's a really interesting area, though, tech companies, because in a pandemic, you don't want the spread of misinformation. You want to follow the science. You want to follow, not pundits like me or Calvin or anyone else, or presenters, you want to follow the science. So you have to try, I think, to be responsible, each platform, in what it allows out. On the other hand, and I do think this is an on the one hand, on the other hand thing, you don't want big tech companies having too much power. And I suppose by signing up to companies like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, we are, in a sense, giving them that power ourselves. So I think wherever possible, tech companies should be very, very light touch when it comes to what people are saying. We do know, just a final point, we do know that there are limits on free speech. Limits include, Calvin, your right, as you have done twice now, to block me on Twitter. Limits also include the law. We're not allowed to incite racial hatred, etc. So we have to acknowledge that free speech isn't entirely free.
OK, but let me hold you to what you previously said, because if these companies are censoring people who are not following the science, who dictates what the science is? Because surely science is a process of exploration. And if there's only one approved narrative of the science and all the other scientists who are fighting against it are censored, is that not the problem?
As I say, this gets into really tricky territory because, of course, at the heart of science is scepticism. And we do need free speech for those scientists who disagree with the norm. But on the other hand, if you are fighting a pandemic that is destroying lives, destroying people's businesses, tearing families apart. I mean, I was allowed to be at the birth of my son. Imagine during the pandemic, those fathers who weren't able to be in hospital with their partners. Imagine those who weren't being able to be by the bedside of their loved ones.
No one has the right to tell you if you're allowed to be at the birth of your son or not.
Well, the state does. But
they shouldn't.
But the state does, and we live in a democracy, and the majority.
That's not democracy.
The majority wins. So it's certainly a form of democracy.
But the majority didn't vote to say the state could dictate whether people could be at the birth of their son.
It voted, sadly, in a Conservative government, And that's what we're left with for the moment. But look, this is really difficult territory because I want scepticism in science. On the other hand, we don't want people such as pundits telling us not to go and get a vaccine because they believe it's not safe.
But they were proved right.
If the overwhelming majority of scientists and doctors say that it's safe to get vaccinated, by safe doesn't mean there's no risk at all, it just means it's broadly speaking in your best interest, then for goodness sake, let's listen to the science and not pundits.
But that comes back to my point that many scientists were arguing against it, saying it wasn't very safe and it wasn't very effective, and they were the ones that were silenced. But Leah, I want to bring it back to a bit of a broader censorship debate, just because Matt brought up that I blocked him twice on Twitter, right? And I did. I blocked him because I didn't like what he was saying. Then I unblocked him because I met him in person. He said, please unblock me. And then he continued to challenge me in a way that was abusive and I would say is untrue.
That's not true. We get on well personally, but I was not abusive to you.
But my point is...
You disagreed with
me. I don't block people I disagree with. I block people that are hostile. I block people that lie. I block people that are abusive. But however, my point is, in blocking you, I have not restricted your freedom of speech. You are free to continue saying this and that, Calvin's vaccine hesitant, etc. You are free to continue doing that. Your free speech has not been harmed. Leah, what is your policy on banning, and do you think it is anti-free speech? Can you be a free speech proponent like yourself and still block people on Twitter?
I think blocking people is a fantastic idea. It doesn't stop you from losing your free speech. You know, Calvin, I'm still welcome to send you rude messages if I like. I won't, but if I like, I can. I think blocking is very important in order just to protect yourself. I block people all the time because people purposely, for political reasons, will try and misunderstand or misinterpret what you say and try and deplatform you and get you taken down. I'm a massive freedom of speech advocate with regards to, following the science. We should always follow the science, but we should always be skeptical too. We should be able to ask questions. Being able to ask questions is so important. The fact that we weren't able to ask questions over the last 2 years, and we would be either deplatformed or socially our names would sort of be blackened. That's really, really concerning. And I think the most concerning part actually, like I said, is the fact that PayPal of all places, when financial services get involved, that for me is when you really know that we are in trouble. And that's actually why I'm a massive proponent and a massive advocate for Bitcoin, actually, because when you hold Bitcoin in the correct way, in a non-custodial way, your money can't be banned, your money can't be confiscated. And we saw this happen in Canada with the truckers, where they had the incorrect opinion. They wanted to express their freedom of speech and actually go out and protest against Trudeau's tyrannical regime, as I like to put it. They had their bank accounts frozen, whereas if you hold Bitcoin, that can't actually happen.
Right, so blocking people's spending ability is a form of tyranny because it's a form of control. And, we've seen this in other countries that have social credit systems where if you're doing something the government doesn't like, they can limit your spending power. And in effect, these digital currencies that are being proposed could potentially have an effect of what PayPal's done just now in blocking people who the government disagrees with and or stopping people spending money on certain things that the government disagrees with. Do you not think that the digital currency argument is a very fine balance between things like Bitcoin, which are decentralized and empowers the people, and these new central bank digital currencies, which in fact give power to the governments instead?
Yeah, absolutely. Having that distinction is so important. So Bitcoin, decentralized, you as an individual are entirely in control of your money. That's great. Then you have the central bank digital currency, which is entirely centralized in the control of the government. Now, that is money which is programmable. And actually, our good friends at the World Economic Forum, I say sarcastically, they spoke about having a carbon allowance. Every individual will have a personal carbon allowance. And how do they implement that? Well, with a central bank digital currency. So Calvin, you go to fill up your car, and actually because you bought too much meat last week, you've reached your carbon allowance, and because meat is supposedly bad for the environment, you've reached your carbon allowance, and now your money is going to be declined. And I don't think people understand how dangerous that is. Like I said, money is literally the energy which fuels your life. Without financial freedom, you have nothing. You don't even have freedom of speech because you won't be able to either buy a plane ticket or buy fuel or whatever it is to go protest those tyrannical lockdowns.
Fantastic. Well said. Matthew, I can see you're itching to jump in on this.
Just a quick question. Calvin, you are a so-called champion of freedom.
Thank you.
You feel you're free, and you are indeed free to block me on Twitter. But why is a company, and I've already acknowledged that there are big issues with big tech, big issues with companies like Twitter or PayPal from denying people access to their services because they've become so powerful. Think of the size of Amazon. It's bigger in terms of the money it brings in than most states in the world. If you're a fan of freedom, though, isn't there a slight problem with suggesting or intimating that PayPal should not be free to block your use of their services?
Not when they have a monopoly. I think that's the distinction. But thank you for that, Matthew Stadlen. And Leah Helpburn, social commentator and author of Undressing Bitcoin. Thank you so much for that interesting, I would say, conversation, both of you. Now, in response to the allegations of censorship of free speech, Union's Toby Young, PayPal have released a statement saying, "We cannot comment on an individual customer's account. PayPal regularly assesses activity against our long-standing acceptable use policy and will discontinue our relationship with account holders who are found to violate our policies." Now onto something else. The producers of the next James Bond film have said the title will depict a more sensitive and emotional Bond, saying that as men are evolving, so is Bond. The decision is only the latest in a long slew of attempts to detoxify popular brands of what campaigners say is outdated attitudes and exclusionary spaces. But many warn these woke changes are robbing entertainment of what made it once great. Joining me now is chairman of the James Bond International Fan Club, David Black. David, what do you make of this whole idea that Bond should be a bit wetter, a bit more feminine?
Yeah, well, look, I think we've got to look back and say, let's not forget that Ian Fleming, when he wrote Bond, it was 1953. We just had a new queen, bless her. We'd come out of the war. We were in the Cold War. He really was someone that we could pin our hopes on to keep England safe and move us on. But let's face it, I don't think anyone realised that we'd still be watching Bond 60, 70 years after he'd written it.
Absolutely. And what I want to ask you is, what do you think the audience think? Because it's all right for the producers to say, look, men are evolving now into what? I don't know, women, I assume. So Bond needs to evolve too. But what do the audience want?
Well, the audience, I think, want what they always wanted. They want a hero. They want someone they can look at and, they have their humdrum lives. They're going to work. They want to go and sit down and watch someone with the fast cars and... I probably can't say this, but I'll say it anyway, and the nice girls, because obviously that might not be applicable anymore. And do they really want to watch someone going around weeping, some sort of who daren't shoot anybody to put the will to rights? I think they've got to be a little bit careful in which way they head. But what I would say is they've been making these films for so long. They've got a good idea of what they're doing, and they know what people like. And I think, in fairness, Bond has evolved over the years. Daniel Craig, he took it to a different place. He's certainly been he's shown a bit more emotion. He hasn't been quite so cold-hearted as some of the earlier films. So it's maybe just progressing a bit further.
Dodgy words there. You're a leader of this fan club. What are the fans saying to you, though? Will they be pushed away? Because people, like you say, people know what to expect from Bond. And if they're not getting what they expect, will they be turned off?
Well, every time a new film is being made and we go through all this, who's going to be the next Bond, everybody tells us, Bond is no longer relevant to today's society. He's had his day, he's been and gone. Then, sure enough, a film will come out, millions go and watch it, it makes millions of pounds, everyone loves it, and then we make another one. And I think the fans love it, and I think whichever way, if it doesn't go too far off the beaten track, the fans will still love it. They just want... the true fans, they still like the gadgets and the cars, and they like the adventure and the places around the world that we go and see. He can be a bit more emotional. I just don't want him to become a complete Nancy.
OK, well, David Black, chairman of the James Bond International Fan Club, thank you very much for your analysis. In a quick one sentence, Matthew Stadlen.
Very quickly, you said more feminine and wetter.
I did.
Most of these female agents, all of them, we're big 6'3", 6'4" men.
We are.
They would wipe the floor with us. And Daniel Craig in the last Bond, he became a family man, more family oriented. He'd wipe the. I wouldn't want to fight him. Would you want to fight him? Come on, this is so outdated.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Now, the Labour Party conference is underway in Liverpool, so let's cross over there now with our GBNews political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, bring us up to date with what's happening over there so far.
Well, first day of Labour Party conference here in Liverpool, and quite a lot of significant actual announcements in some regards. We heard from Keir Starmer a little bit earlier on. He's been doing some of the TV interviews, as is traditional at party conference. And we heard a little bit where Labour stand on this issue of taxation, that they would reverse that 45p cut or the cut to the 45p tax rate, I should say, that Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, announced on Friday. They think it is unfair, that it benefits the wealthy too much, Calvin, but that they would keep the planned cut to income tax from on the bottom rate of tax from 20p to 19p, which is planned for the middle of next year. Labour arguing that actually genuinely does help working people, and so they would keep that. And in terms of, though, the wider questions about the cost of living crisis this winter, because they've already set out a plan for the next 6 months, how much further would they go? Labour saying they haven't really come up with a policy on that. But I think what is interesting is, as they gather here in Liverpool this week, is a reminder in many regards that the party's come quite a long way since that 2019 election. What, the worst defeat Labour had seen since the 1930s. Whatever you think about Keir Starmer, he has somewhat turned around the fortunes of the Labour Party. And also, Calvin, I think it's important to remember that, in 2019, very few people thought that Labour had a chance of government in 2024. That's not now the case. There is a sense of hope here that they could do well at the next general election. They could be the largest party at the next general election. And that is a sign, I think, of the confidence that you certainly feel among the delegates gathered here today.
That they've been given some wiggle room, so to speak, with this tax cut, in that Labour can now say we need to increase taxes, and they only have to push it back to where it was. They don't actually have to put any further burdens on the British people.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, the Conservative Party would argue that taxation was and is at the moment, until these tax cuts come in, at the highest level that we've seen for 70 years. That even under the Conservative government of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, the taxes were extraordinarily high. In fact, actually, it was the Labour Party, in many regards, who used to attack the Conservative Party for having taxes that were that high. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there will be big questions for the Labour Party, particularly if they want to increase public spending, as they say they will. If they are going to keep some of these tax cuts, particularly that one on the basic rate of tax, where is the money going to come from, essentially? But at least Labour today have managed to have a relatively coherent answer to those big questions about taxation. But Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, this morning, making it clear that from the government's point of view, this is only the beginning, that there are still big substantial changes coming, maybe to taxation, but also around regulation, maybe to immigration and other things that this government wants to embark on. And certainly, for all the government want to do, lots of those questions will be chucked at the Labour Party. I think the main mission, Calvin, for the Labour Party over the next few days is that they do not just spend all the time having to react to what the government is setting out doing, that they can create their own narrative, their own story about trying to convince people why they should vote for them at the next general election.
It is fascinating because when the Tories implement tax cuts, they usually have a cut in public spending too to match it. And we haven't seen that promised yet. And I assume the Labour Party are going to have to come up with some quick ideas of how they would do so. But I want to talk to you about the patriotism of the Labour Party, because there's been a push over the last year or so, at least, to make the party seem patriotic, at least, to kind of recapture those red seats that they lost up in the Midlands and above. Now, they sang God Save the King at the Labour Party conference, didn't they? What was the reaction to that? Particularly, what was the reaction from Corbyn?
Yeah, indeed, here it is. This is what they were handing out, in case you didn't know the words, the national anthem that they were singing a little bit earlier on. Again, a reminder, as you say, of where Keir Starmer's taken the Labour Party. We're a long way away from kind of Corbynism, aren't we, which was only a couple of years ago. Everyone stood up, everyone sang the national anthem. There was no booing or jeering or anything like that. It was all very respectful. And you're right, this is a very deliberate strategy of the Labour Party to try and win back some of their core former voters who do place patriotism at the heart of their politics. We see it, don't we, when Keir Starmer does interviews now. It normally is in front of the Union flag. All I would add, though, is that, for a lot in the Labour Party, they may feel it's going too far, but this is a strategy of the leadership, as I say, to try and win the next general election. And frankly, at the moment, again, when you talk to these Labour delegates, there is hope that that strategy is actually starting to work.
Let's see if it's authentic and genuine, and let's see if it works with the voters. GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much. Now, you're watching Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson. Here is the latest weather forecast.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be turning cloudier and windier as a band of rain pushes in from the north. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and after a fine day, it'll be somewhat cloudier by this evening, but it will stay dry with rain not expected until tonight. A similar picture in the southeast and around London as well. The cloud will have increased through the afternoon, but it will be a dry end to the day. Whilst 1 or 2 showers are possible across North Wales, further south it will stay dry this evening, turning increasingly cloudy and windy though. That's how things are shaping up across the Midlands as well. Here there may be the odd shower towards the north, whilst further south it will be dry but cloud and winds will increase. Meanwhile, in the northeast of England, we can expect a largely cloudy and blustery end to the day. There's a chance of some showery rain, most likely further west, before heavier rain arrives later. By 7 p.m, the band of rain will have cleared northern Scotland. However, heavy rain will lay across southern Scotland, bringing some heavy rain here with strong winds as well. It'll also be a wet day, end to the day, for much of Northern Ireland as that rain spreads in. The cloudy, wet and windy weather means it will stay mild overnight. The band of rain will continue southwards, reaching southern parts by the end of the night, with showers in the north. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. This is Real Britain on your TV, radio and online. Shortly I'll be joined in the studio by Gavin Peacock, the former Premier League footballer turned pastor, and we'll be checking in on the Labour conference in Liverpool later too. Now, political commentator Matthew Stadlen will be joining. He's around in the studio causing trouble as per. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Rapidly approaching 1 minute past 3, here's the latest news from the GB newsroom. With the Labour Party conference now well underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has been announcing plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan and appeal to voters who are, as he says, sick and tired of soaring energy costs. He opened the conference with a tribute to the late Queen.
That the country she came to symbolise is bigger than any one individual or institution. An example that taught us that whatever challenges we face, the value of service endures. And a reminder that the creativity, the hard work, the enterprise that defines this nation is as abundant now as it ever was.
That was the Labour leader speaking earlier. The deputy leader says Britain is at a crossroads as she addressed her party's annual conference. During a lengthy speech, Angela Rayner vowed that Labour would raise economic standards by, quote, clawing back public money from those who fail to deliver for taxpayers. She outlined the party's plans for new rights for workers, announcing what she's calling a fair work standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access. She also promised to pump money back into the pockets of local communities.
The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. A Labour government to unite this country through the darkest times ahead. A Labour government to hand power back to the people and the places that once powered Britain. And a Labour government that will always be on the side of working people.
Voting is underway in Italy, and it could see the election of the country's most right-wing government since World War II and its first female Prime Minister. An alliance led by Giorgia Meloni, called Brothers of Italy, appeared on course for victory when the last opinion polls were published. However, support for the left-leaning Five Star Movement has picked up in recent days. Voting continues until 10 p.m. UK time. A British fighter freed from Russian-backed forces has admitted he didn't think he would survive his ordeal. Aidan Aslin told The Sun on Sunday he was beaten and stabbed during interrogations. He was sentenced to death alongside fellow Briton Sean Pinner, but both were released last Wednesday. The Prime Minister is expected to relax immigration rules as part of plans to boost business growth. Employers have been calling for more migrant workers to be given UK visas due to labour shortages. It comes as the number of migrants crossing the English Channel this year passed 32,000. The Defence Secretary plans to spend at least £52 billion on Britain's military in response to Russian aggression. In his first interview since Liz Truss became PM, Ben Wallace said it will be used to grow Britain's armed forces. He told the Sunday Telegraph that the 3% spending increase comes after decades defending against cuts. The Foreign Secretary will travel to Asia tomorrow as part of Britain's diplomatic tilt towards the region. The Foreign Ministry says James Cleverly will start his 3-day trip in Japan, then head to South Korea and finally Singapore. He'll also attend the state funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting from Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions will remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. A state of emergency has been declared as well, although there's been no reports of any deaths. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery.
There have been evacuation orders issued. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. There are reports of roads washed out and homes destroyed. We've all seen the images. This is a very powerful and dangerous storm.
And a flotilla lit up parts of the River Thames in London last night as a tribute to the late Queen. As part of an installation called Reflections, 150 illuminated boats travelled from Albert Bridge to Tower Bridge. The Queen's row barge Gloriana, rowed by Ben Fogle, was the centrepiece. You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Father Calvin.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson, and here's what's coming up on the show. Former Premier League footballer turned pastor Gavin Peacock joins me in the studio to talk about his new book and faith. And Home Secretary Suella Braverman has told police to stop symbolic gestures and focus on fighting crimes, thank goodness. The Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner in Hampshire, Donna Jones, will give her take on this. Also, the animal welfare charity PETA calls for a sex strike against meat-eating men to save the world. Dating coach Nadia Essex will give her thoughts on this new proposal. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on all of this. Please tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. And of course, you can watch us online too. Stay tuned. Former professional footballer Pastor Gavin Peacock, who played for Chelsea and Newcastle United with a footballing career spanning 3 decades, decided to change his life by becoming a church minister. His new book, A Greater Glory from Pitch to Pulpit, explains his story and his love for football, love for his family, and most importantly, his love for God. Joining me now in the studio is former professional footballer turned pastor Gavin Peacock and Aidan McGee, sports broadcaster and writer. Over to you, Aidan.
Thanks very much indeed, Calvin. Yeah, that's right. I've known Gavin for, probably 20 years now. I probably started working as a journalist at the tail end of his career. I was living in Gillingham when Gavin played for my local club, but he also played for the team that I supported. So it's quite rare because there's 2 teams there out of the pyramid of 92 which don't have much link together. So it was a kind of a happy coincidence, really. So I followed Gavin's career for many a long year. I watched him at QPR, I watched him at Gillingham and elsewhere. And I've noticed that you've penned all those times down in the first sort of half of the book, I would say. And it's a really decent read. I just want to know why you decided to write your book now. I mean, it's a good 20 years since you finished playing football.
It is, and you mentioned QPR. I mean, you just told me you were at my debut game in
1986. Plastic pitch on Sheffield Wednesday. We were 2-0 up.
Indeed, yeah, indeed. So that dates us both, I think.
Yes.
But why I decided to write the book, I mean, often as a professional sportsman, people say, oh, you should write your biography. And they said that during my career. And I thought, well, I haven't actually lived much life to really offer much wisdom. Then I went into media. I was on Match of the Day and BBC. And they said, well, that's an interesting career switch. Do it then. And so, no, not quite yet. Then I turned 50 a few years ago. I thought, half a century, that's a decent amount of time to live. And I've had a pretty interesting journey in life. I thought, right, let me put it down on paper. And really, the book, I wanted it to be a different kind of sports biography. And I would just say that it's a story of life in all of its complexities, set against the backdrop of the beautiful game, but with the floodlight of my Christian faith upon it. And so I think anyone can pick it up because it touches on key things in life, winning, losing, life, death, suffering, family, all of these things. But then offers a biblical perspective on things, and I think it's pretty accessible.
I think I was watching Football Focus, it would have been around about 2008, and you were by then a fixture. That was a good 5-6 years after you finished playing. You were a fixture in the commentary box at Premier League grounds. You were commentating on games fairly regularly, offering analysis. And then suddenly one Sunday, I think it was, or one Saturday, you just decided you had 1 minute at the end of a show to tell everybody you were leaving. Nobody had any inkling of it, but you were off.
Yeah, it was. It happened over a period of time. I was actually working for the BBC. It was going well. I remember just after the World Cup in Germany in 2006, and it was at the pinnacle of things then, and yet really sensed a strong call to preaching the word and ministering in the church. And I've been a leader for my football teams and captain and such, but I wondered if this was for me. It got affirmed by the church leadership. And so then I was studying. I was going to Cambridge and doing Old Testament, New Testament studies on a Monday and Tuesday after I'd been on the shows at the weekend. And all the guys that are studying with me, they just want to ask about what I said about Arsenal at the weekend or West Ham. And I'm saying, I need to study the Bible here. But I said to my wife then, I think I'm going to give up a second dream career, because it really was a second dream career and I was loving it. To take some time to prepare for church ministry if this was what God would have for me.
I think about 2 or 3 years after you left, I seem to remember Martin Samuel, I think it was, in the Daily Mail doing a big piece with you. And I've actually used this to discuss in mental health seminars about what footballers go through in terms of what they experience on their journey. Because you said that football, for everything it gave you, and it gave you a fantastic life, and you miss being super fit, and you miss the adulation to some degree as well, and scoring the goals and the success. But it was always supreme highs or insufferable lows. There was never really anything in between. I want to ask you, in your years after leaving for Canada and getting in touch with your faith, did you discover that equilibrium that you felt you needed?
Well, I think, I had that during my football career, because if you're a Christian and a sportsman, all of a sudden you're not the sum of your performances on a Saturday or a weekday whenever you play. That's not your identity ultimately. Your identity lies in Jesus Christ and in being created by him and for him and being a child of God as such. And so then that gives you that equilibrium in the highs and lows. And they are, everyone has highs and lows in life, yeah? Some people have really bad lows, really big highs, but in football it's like it's crushed into a week.
Well,
Massive
yeah,
highs,
exactly. It could be a game, in a game.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about mental health, this, that and the other, and rightly so to some degree. But being a Christian then gives you that perspective, because you're not tied, in your identity, you're not tied to that. And so it gives you a kind of a platform to work forward in your career.
Right. Before I hand back to Calvin, so what are your overriding memories of your career? Because you played for some fantastic managers, Kevin Keegan, Glenn Hoddle, obviously, Harry Redknapp. What was he like 30 years ago?
Oh, Harry, yeah. Harry bought me when he was at Bournemouth, and he was a young manager. I was a young player, just married to Amanda, and I had a good year with Harry. Learned a lot. Bright, inventive manager. Great with players, and I'm grateful to Harry for what he did for my career.
Brilliant. Pastor Gavin, I have to ask you, it sounds like you have a true calling, and that can't be easy when you're in the height of a career already. How did you discern it?
Yeah, as I was saying, I sensed the call, but it's actually my wife was in hospital. She wasn't very well, and often suffering kind of, it focuses us sometimes, you know. And I was reading the Bible a lot. I was considering the passages that talk about preaching God's word and a pastor's call. And I thought, well, that's just an internal feeling. You know, it could just be subjective. I'll ask what my leadership think. And they affirmed certain things, and I followed it from there. And then when I started to preach and teach, I was encouraged. I was filled with a joy, but also a compulsion to do it. And other people responded. And along with my wife, and I came to the decision, well, this is what I'm going to do and the calling I'm going to follow.
That nudging or that pulling feeling can be quite annoying, can't it?
Indeed, yeah. You can't turn it down, even if you want to.
Yeah. So have you always been a Christian?
No, not always. I became a Christian when I was 18. So my father was a professional footballer for Charlton Athletic, Keith Peacock.
He was the first ever substitute, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so this thing we know about 5 substitutes, whatever, Gavin's father, Keith, was a successful manager and coach in his own right, was the first ever substitute in 1967?
You could be right. Or 65, it might have been 65 even.
Wow.
So I just want to follow in Dad's footsteps, yeah? And I did that, and like lots of schoolboys, it's a schoolboy dream to be a footballer. And so when I'd achieved that, I thought, well, this is what's going to bring me ultimate happiness. That's what the world tells you, you know, fame, fortune, and a great career. But it didn't ultimately, because football was my God. If I played well, I was up. If I played bad, I was down. And I just went along to the local church one night. I was living in Barnhurst, and Barnhurst Methodist Church it was, and the minister said, do you fancy coming back to my house after? There's a youth meeting there, people your age. Pulled up to that meeting in my Ford Escort XR3i, proper 1980s car.
Did you not go to keep your mum company?
And my mum had gone along that night. Yeah, just kept her company. Yeah. And but I end up going back to this meeting. I've got the XR3i. I've got the mullet as well, the 1980s mullet. But I walked into that room with everything that was, you know, I was in the in crowd. These guys weren't. Yeah. But when they talked about Jesus Christ, when they talked about him and prayed, there was a reality and joy they had that I didn't. And then I realised when I heard the Bible and what the minister was saying, that my greatest need wasn't the approval of the crowd on a Saturday, but to be in a right relationship with the living God, against whom I sinned, under his judgment I was, and yet because of his grace, through the Lord Jesus Christ, his life, death and resurrection, I could have that. And I believed, and then everything changed. Football wasn't God anymore. Jesus was, and I could enjoy being a footballer for what it was.
I love the symmetry of following in your dad's footsteps to following in your father's footsteps.
Interesting.
I think that's very good. You mentioned the idolatry of football being your God. Have you now turned that around to giving glory to God for your career?
Indeed, yes. And I think as a footballer, I grew in that understanding that, you know, we're all made by God for God, and that's why a Christian in any walk of life, in any job they do, they can have great fulfillment because they can do it to God, unto God. And I always remember that film Chariots of Fire and the great Eric Liddell. And in the film, you know, he speaks to his sister Jenny, and he's about to compete in the Olympics, and he says, God made me for China, because he was going to be a missionary in China, and he actually died in a prisoner of war camp out there. He said, God made me for China, but he also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. And I thought, well, that's the way I played football. You know, he made me for himself, but he also made me a footballer for a little while. And when I performed, when I scored a goal, I could feel God's pleasure, as it were.
You scored a few as well.
I'd like to think so too. Is this a mission for you? How have your fans taken to your faith conversion?
Well, I don't know, really. I suppose they look at my Twitter feed or social media and they may be confused if I'm making a comment on football and then I'm talking about the Bible in the next tweet. Yeah. But I think it's just been a case of, yes, I mean, my calling's to the church, but there is a connection that I felt I've had with people in the UK and through football, where it actually is an open door to actually bring the gospel to folks. Because people want glory. They go to the stadium to see something glorious, to be lifted out of an ordinary life and to praise something beautiful. And made in the image of God, that's what we were made for, is to praise God. And so I can actually point to what they're doing there, and then people want to do it together and have that sense of identity as they do it. And so I can point them and say, these are echoes in your heart of what you've been created for.
But is that difficult, bringing Christ to football?
It can be, but as I say, I just did an event on Friday night at Selhurst Park Football Club, and there were lots of folks there who weren't Christians, who were football fans, and I took them through my life story, but bring them to the gospel and to the most important things of life. I think really as well, people come to that stage at some point, don't they? Life and death. Even most recently with Her Majesty's death, people are considering, even the Queen dies and we will all die, and these ultimate realities then come to bear in your life, and you say, well, what are you living for? And who ultimately makes sense of the world?
Well, that funeral was the greatest expression of the Christian faith in history, I think, after the resurrection, of course.
Indeed.
It was remarkable.
You're very complimentary of Justin Welby as well, weren't you?
Slightly complimentary.
Well, I was going to ask about this. I know it's a bit of a curveball, but give me your take on what's going on in Canada, because to me it's wickedness thriving.
Yeah, I mean, politically, not at all where I would stand. I would say as well, for the Christian church across the board, persecution's coming, and it's here now. The conversion therapy bill's been passed in the province in which I live, and in the end, just preaching biblical sexuality, biblical sanctification, it can get pastors in trouble. So I think for Christians and Christian pastors, ministers leading the way, we need to stand firm on what the Bible teaches and face the consequences. So, yeah, difficult days, but always hopeful days, because we know from the scriptures that Jesus Christ builds his church and gates of hell will not prevail.
Amen. Thank you very much for that. That was former professional footballer turned pastor Gavin Peacock. His book, A Greater Glory from Pitch to Pulpit, is out now. And my thanks also go to, of course, sports broadcaster and writer, the wonderful Aidan McGee. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we'll be discussing a study that has found there is a global demand for more coverage of news stories about faith and religion. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be turning cloudier and windier as a band of rain pushes in from the north. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and after a fine day, it'll be somewhat cloudier by this evening, but it will stay dry, with rain not expected until tonight. A similar picture in the southeast and around London as well. The cloud will have increased through the afternoon, but it will be a dry end to the day. Whilst 1 or 2 showers are possible across North Wales, further south it will stay dry this evening, turning increasingly cloudy and windy though. That's how things are shaping up across the Midlands as well. Here there may be the odd shower towards the north, whilst further south it will be dry but cloud and winds will increase. Meanwhile, in the northeast of England, we can expect a largely cloudy and blustery end to the day. There's a chance of some showery rain, most likely further west, before heavier rain arrives later. By 7 p.m, the band of rain will have cleared northern Scotland. However, heavy rain will lay across southern Scotland, bringing some heavy rain here with strong winds as well. It'll also be a wet day, end to the day, for much of Northern Ireland as that rain spreads in. The cloudy, wet and windy weather means it will stay mild overnight. The band of rain will continue southwards, reaching southern parts by the end of the night, with showers in the north. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back. I'm Father Calvin Robinson. Now, a survey has revealed that there is a demand for more faith and religion stories to be covered in the news. The findings showed that 53% believe the media actively ignores religious stories, and 61% said the media perpetuates faith-based stereotypes about religious believers. But with an ever increasingly secularized Western world, should we even be surprised? Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Dritten Nesho, the CEO and founder of Harris X, who conducted the research. Dritten, first of all, talk me through what these findings show from your perspective.
Thanks for having me on, Calvin. I think you can summarize it in three concise bullet points. Number one is that there's a great opportunity for better coverage of faith and religious-based content amongst the global media. There's a near universal consensus in the 18 countries that we polled that higher quality coverage of faith and religion is needed. There is a set of immense challenges. 53%, as you cited, feel that the media doesn't actively cover faith and religion, and 61% believe that when they do, it tends to perpetuate stereotypes rather than help address them. And there's also a path forward, a set of findings that define the path forward, where close to 8 in 10 of our respondents around the globe believe that the stereotypes related to faith and religion need to be treated at the same intensity and at the same level as gender stereotypes or other types of stereotypes that play into the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations that are occurring globally in today's world. So a very interesting set of findings that elevate the need for better coverage of faith and religion, the need for better faith fluency, for lack of a better term, within the newsrooms on a global basis.
That is a fascinating perspective because, of course, any stereotype based on gender or ethnicity or race or anything like that would be rightly frowned upon, but stereotypes based on religion are not. Why is that an acceptable bias, do you think? Or why do the people you polled think this is an acceptable bias?
Well, the people I polled say that this isn't an acceptable bias, and it makes a lot of sense because 82% across the world self-identified as being spiritual, faithful, or religious. So we're not talking about some marginal element of personal identity here. We're talking about a core element of personal identity, just like gender, just like ethnicity, just like race. And what this study concludes is that proper conversations around faith and religion need to be elevated to that pantheon of diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, and that the media has quite a bit of work to do to make sure that issues or topics around faith and religion are properly addressed within newsrooms. So an interesting set of findings, but not acceptable by any stretch based on what we heard from the respondents in the study.
Right, so we've just had Gavin Peacock on the show talking about his journey from professional football to a pastor of a church. But GB News is very different because we're trying to offer a different perspective. We have a reverend presenting, for goodness sake. Most other channels would not dare do anything like that. Why is that? Is it a lack of faith in the newsrooms themselves?
That is part of the issue. As part of this study, we also spoke with 35 journalists at different levels of decision-making around the globe. And what we found is that newsroom economics tend to drive the proper coverage of faith and religion out of focus within the newsroom. Newsrooms tend to be more secular rather than not. Because of newsroom economics, in today's world, you have more generalists covering faith and religion rather than people who have lived experience or are specialized in its coverage, so that there's an increased fear of getting it wrong, and there's an increased fear of whatever type of backlash might come from making the wrong judgment in how you're interpreting faith and religion. So there's a series of dynamics within the newsroom that journalists themselves, in our study, were very open in acknowledging that have led to decreasing quality of coverage in faith and religion and its marginalization when it comes to addressing issues of culture, issues of society, issues of entertainment, and even issues of politics. So a fairly bleak picture in the words of journalists themselves, and that was part and parcel of the component of this study.
Dritten, thank you so much for identifying this problem. Thank you for all the work you've done in this area. Now it's on people like us to make the change. That was Dritten Nesho, the CEO and founder of HarrisX. Thank you for your time. Now joining me in the studio still is Matthew Stadlen, political commentator. Matthew, is religious news being ignored by the media?
I think quite possibly. I think probably one of the core reasons why it is, if it is, and that research suggests that it is that we are, although many millions of us would loosely describe ourselves as Christian, we are a much less religious country than we used to be. I'm a Christian, well, I was a Christian, I was confirmed at the age of about 13. I lost my faith. I've had an interesting journey, personal journey with faith. I got married a couple of months ago in a church, and I take a lot of spiritual direction from Christianity. I think Western society is largely based on Christian values. That doesn't mean that the values in the Jewish religion, and I'm ethnically half Jewish, or the Muslim religion and so forth, aren't also hugely valuable, but we should ignore the fact that our societies are based on Christian values, perhaps to their peril, because I think the idea of loving thy neighbour, the idea of forgiveness, the idea of fidelity, these are actually core moral values that underpin the way that we can most helpfully live our lives. So when I was a presenter on LBC, I used to largely enjoy hosting.
You haven't mentioned you used to present on LBC.
Yeah, for 4 years. I used to enjoy hosting phone-in shows about God and about whether people believed in God, whatever faith they happened to come from.
Yeah.
One issue I did find, though, sadly, and it's sometimes the way with phone-in shows, is that a lot of homophobic views came in. Sadly, a lot of the Christians who wanted to talk about Christianity and their faith, a faith, as I say, that I've shared from my past, also wanted to air homophobic views, and that was upsetting.
That's a great shame because, as you mentioned, Christian views are British views or the other way around. That's important because they are good views, they're good values, and we can point to many places around the world that do not share Christian values, and it's a good thing that should be promoted around the world. So I'm absolutely with you on that regard. But there's clearly an audience for this. There's clearly a demand for more religious news. Why do you think newsrooms aren't responding to the market?
I think it's probably a case of following what is in the news. So if there is a big story, the news tends to be, as you know, negative. And I think it's right that there's a space on news channels for good news. If there is a negative story, though, in the church or in Islam or in Judaism, that will likely be covered. Sadly, when the Catholic Church got itself into a terrible muddle through the evils of child abuse, that was extensively covered. So I think it is largely a question of following the news story themselves. But I do believe in diversity and the idea that we should have a greater representation, perhaps of Christians, if we don't have many Christians in newsrooms. I wouldn't turn my nose up about that. I would just add one thing, and that is I think that there is a certain sneering attitude in this country today about Christianity.
Sneering at Christianity.
It's sneering at Christianity.
Yeah, it's the most persecuted religion in the world.
I think that's very negative, just as I think Islamophobia is negative and so on and so forth. So I think Christianity has a real place in our society. Christian values, when they are the sort of values that I believe God and Jesus intended, they're very powerful. I don't think British values are Christian values exclusively. There are millions of patriotic, very, very do-gooding Muslims and Jews in this country as well.
That's neither here nor there, but thank you for that.
Well, it's right here and right
I think
now.
the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, all of these news channels need to take a page of GB News' book and get some more religious coverage on their stations. That was political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Thank you, Matthew. Now, you're with GB News on TV and on DAB radio, and next we'll be discussing the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, calling on police to focus on crime and not woke causes. Alleluia. Now it's time to check the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Going up to 34 minutes past 3, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. With the Labour Party conference underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan and appeal to voters who are struggling with soaring energy costs. The Deputy Labour leader says Britain is at a crossroads as she addressed her party's annual conference. Angela Rayner outlining Labour's plans for new workers' rights, announcing what she called a Fair Work Standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access. She also promised to pump money back into the pockets of local communities.
Just as we were in 1997, we're now at a crossroads. The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. The next Labour government will pump money back into the pockets of local communities, the people who built Britain.
The leader of the RMT union warns the railway industry is in crisis. During a fringe meeting at the Labour Party conference, Mick Lynch criticised public service contracts and claimed a number of train operators are close to collapse. However, he did say a meeting with Transport Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan was a step forward, although no progress has been made in breaking the deadlock. COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions do remain in place. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Calvin will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Father Calvin Robinson. Now, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has written to top chief police saying they should focus on stopping crime and catching criminals rather than symbolic gestures. The minister remarked, initiatives and diversity and inclusion should not take precedence over common sense policing. Thank you. Now, with me to discuss this is Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner Donna Jones and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. First of all, thank you very much for joining me. Donna, what did the Home Secretary outline in her remarks?
Well, yes, she wrote a letter yesterday to all leaders in policing in the United Kingdom. She wrote to Chief Constables, Police and Crime Commissioners, to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. And what she laid out in that letter was very simple. She said, I expect you to be cutting crime. I am setting you a 20% target to cut serious violence. And I think she mentioned antisocial behaviour 4 times in her letter. It was the only crime type that was repeated the whole way through. What she's saying is that policing needs to get back to basics, less time spent on woke agendas and more time cutting crime and making all of our communities safer, which I very much welcome.
I mean, it sounds fantastic, and I'll ask you both the same question, but starting with you, Donna. Is this going to make a difference, or is it just another symbolic gesture from the government?
Well, no, when the Home Secretary writes to all police chiefs across the country, it's definitely taken incredibly seriously. I know that there will be chief constables and certainly the NPCC, the National College of Policing, will be reflecting on that letter over the weekend. I'm expecting meetings of the NPCC to take place early next week. I'll certainly be talking with chief officers in my force on Monday about exactly what this means. Now, I've known Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, for 8 years. In fact, I've worked with her for 8 years. She is a Hampshire MP. I live just over a mile from her constituency. I wrote my police and crime plan that sets the priorities for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary last year when I became the Police and Crime Commissioner. I made more police, increased visibility, which she talks about in her letter, and tackling antisocial behaviour as 3 of my 9 top priorities for my Chief Constable. So Suella and I are very much at one on this. It is one of the things that slipped over the last few years in policing. They do need to be addressing serious violence and those more serious, impactful crimes, but they absolutely cannot take their eye off the neighbourhood crimes and those things that affect the vast majority of people paying taxes and living in this country.
You're speaking music to my ears, Donna. I happened to be on a governing body with Suella for a while. I think she is one of the very few true Conservatives in the government. But Matthew, is that enough? Is this a symbolic gesture, or will it make a genuine difference?
I mean, Calvin, you talk about true Conservatism.
Yes.
We've had Conservative Prime Ministers
But not true
number 10
Conservatives.
for 12 years, and yet they cut 20,000 police officers. Now, we know that they're supposed to be bringing 20,000 police officers back. We're nowhere near that, I don't believe, quite yet, and Suella Braverman, I think, accepts that. I've got a lot of time for police officers. I think they're doing an incredibly brave and dangerous job, but clearly not everything is being got right, because people are selling and taking drugs, just as an example, with impunity. You see in daylight, I mean, I'm born and bred in London, you now see in broad daylight drugs drops being carried out on the road next door to where you live. It's completely unacceptable. A lot more needs to be done. And people seem to burgle with impunity as well. I think it's a tiny fraction, it's certainly in some areas of this country, where a tiny fraction of burglaries that actually get solved. People need to feel safe in their homes. People need to feel safe in their communities. I was out and about in Paddington over the last couple of days, not far from where I live, and was brought up in Notting Hill because my little baby son Wilfred was being born in St Mary's Hospital. You don't want to muck around in Paddington after hours. There's some seriously unsavoury characters out. The police need to get a grip, and on that, and that alone, for the moment, I'll agree with the Home Secretary.
That's a fair point, Matthew, and I think the problem we might face, Donna, is that with this strict guidance that police constables and people in charge might find severe and that they have to follow, it's the police themselves on the ground. When we look at, in the Met in particular, 7 out of 10 police officers have never arrested anybody. Do they have what it takes to follow along with this new guidance?
Yeah, well, no, they don't, and we do need more police officers. And actually, the points that we just made there about issues in Paddington, and that's obviously not exclusive in terms of the issues across London, which, because of the, the complex nature of the social makeup of London, there are very different crime drivers there. But actually, the Home Secretary does specifically mention the Met Police. She talks about driving up the standards in policing. She talks about those police forces that are currently in special measures and how she expects them to have their standards improved. And that particularly refers to the Met. I do think it's interesting, one of the points that's come out of when we're talking about police numbers, and ultimately that's what this is about, the Labour conference today, where Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, has pledged recruiting 13,000 more police officers if Labour form another government, when actually it's the Labour-run police forces across the country, where they've got Labour police and crime commissioners, where they are not hitting their 20,000 share of the national uplift. Labour-run London with Sadiq Khan and Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden are nowhere near their target. We're just approaching the 14,000 mark out of that 20,000 this month. I'm overshooting mine. I'm going to, deliver by 102 extra police officers beyond what I'm being paid by the government. But actually, Labour need to take a good, strong look here at what they're going to do to tackle the issues in the Met, because they are significant.
With respect, it is a bit rich to attack Labour for problems with policing in this country. You can't police without police. Police disappeared, it seems to me, from the streets under these Conservative governments. As I said, and I'll repeat it, and everyone watching and listening should know this, under Conservative Prime Ministers, 20,000 police officers have been removed. Think about that, 20,000.
Yeah.
Imagine the crimes that could be solved if you hadn't taken 20,000 police officers off.
We know that, and that's true.
And we've just spoken about Conservative Prime Ministers. If you don't mind me just coming back very, very quickly on this one. We spoke about Conservative Prime Ministers. I get the point. Listen, police cuts are not great. We all know that was not a good move. But actually, I would argue that under the previous Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson, when he was the Mayor of London, crime fell. And under Sadiq Khan, with the exception of 2021, because of COVID, it's gone up. Serious violence and knife crimes have gone up every year. Boris proved it can be done in London, and Labour are failing.
It's a good point, and I'm not going to defend the Conservative government because I do think cutting police is always wrong. However, it's how those police are used, the ones that we have. And when we saw the police reaction at Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, that rapid response, that was policing done properly. But I'm not convinced that all police are capable of that, because what I've seen over the last couple of years is two-tiered policing. So the police that we do have aren't being used as a positive resource unless it's a movement that is seen as the antithesis of the narrative. For example, climate change protesters protesters are given one treatment, Black Lives Matter protesters are given the same treatment, whereas people who are protesting against, say, lockdowns or the vaccines are given a different treatment entirely. How do we address that two-tiered approach that we seem to be witnessing?
I'll just say police officers are there to do a job. And although I have a lot of sympathy with environmental campaigners because we are facing a climate crisis and that is just the science of it. Not every single scientist in the world, but it's the science of it. You still have to be arrested if you break the law in the name of environmentalism. Although I have a lot of respect for people who are prepared to do that and risk their own futures by going to jail, if you break the law, the police should not punish you, they should arrest you. They should deal with you according to the law. So I don't care what it is, in what way you're breaking the law, you have to be dealt with under the law. That's called the rule of law. And if we get away from that, we're in big problems. I would say that there are little caveats to that.
Well, let's pause it there. Let's let Donna come in as well.
Yeah, I completely acknowledge the point you've made there, that there appears to be one rule for one and one rule for another, and that simply cannot be sustained. But what we will see under this new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is somebody who will take a much firmer approach. And in fact, a report has just been written, an external report being written about counter-terrorism policing in Britain today. And it talks about there is too much focus on far-right extremism and not enough on Islamic issues and Islamic threats to Britain that are coming externally from around the world. And I think that's a good point. People should look at that. It's on one of the main national newspapers. It's on their website today. I won't name which one, but it is on there. Have a look for it. And it's an interesting read. I'm not sure I completely agree with all of it, but it does say that there has been a shift over the last 10 years in really kind of this homing in on far-right extremism. Now, I think it is there, and I also think that mental health issues are playing a large part in the counter-terrorism response required by policing across Britain today.
Donna, I think you raised some very important issues. Thank you for that. That's Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner Donna Jones. I wish we had more like her. And also thank you, Matthew Stadlen, for jumping in on that conversation too. Now, on to another story. Prime Minister Liz Truss has told Israel that she's considering moving Britain's embassy to fiercely contested Jerusalem, a decision that would follow former US President Donald Trump's move back in 2018. Up until now, like most other countries, the British embassy remains in the bustling coastal city of Tel Aviv, despite Israel designating Jerusalem as its capital. Here to discuss this, international politics and director for the Council of Arab-British Understanding, Chris Doyle. Chris, thank you very much for joining me. Now, the US, Kosovo, Honduras, Guatemala are the only nations so far with embassies in Jerusalem. Why do you think that is?
It's been the international consensus now for over 70 years that the issue of Jerusalem, one of the most contested cities in the world, I mean, this is a city that's been fought over for centuries. It's changed hands in violent conflict some 37 times, that it should be resolved, its future status, through negotiation. And I think that what the critics are saying about Liz Truss's decision to review is that this is a very one-sided approach. It is rewarding one party to this conflict and ignoring the other stakeholders in the city of Jerusalem. So you have Israelis, you have Palestinians who live there, two peoples, but you also have a city, of course, that's sacred, of importance to people of three faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So I think that is not necessary to do this. I think that we don't have to break that consensus. I think it's highly risky. When Donald Trump had that embassy opened in 2018, it was on the same day that 60 people were killed, 60 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces. It did exacerbate tensions on the ground. So instead of doing something that promotes the interests of one single party in this conflict, we should be doing far more to find a resolution to this conflict, a resolution that incorporates an inclusive prospect for this city, rather than stirring it up.
If it is the designated capital city of Israel, as proclaimed by Israelis, surely that is an appropriate move. But then again, there are people on the other side of the argument that would say it breaks international law. So where would you fall in that?
It does break international law. There are Security Council resolutions talking about not changing the status of the city. But also, you could immediately say, well, the Palestinians want to have Jerusalem as their capital too. Why you pick one side. So I don't think it is necessary to do this. I think it stirs it up. And it also is rewarding a party to this conflict, which at the moment is conducting some very serious violations of international law in East Jerusalem, which is still occupied territory, in terms of home dispossessions, forcing people out, building really large settlements in Jerusalem, contrary to international law, but also settlements that would jeopardize the chance of the preferred solution internationally to this conflict, the two-state solution. So I think it is very alarming that essentially for very transactional reasons, just to promote better relations with Israel, warmer trade, maybe support for Ukraine, that we ditch conflict resolution and peace.
That is one perspective, one that a lot of people would disagree with. But Chris Doyle, thank you very much for that. That's the International Politics and Director for the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Now, the animal rights organisation PETA has suggested that women should impose a sex ban on carnivorous males because they are responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions. Apparently, men cause 41% more pollution than women do when they eat meat. With me now is dating coach Nadia Essex. Nadia, thank you for joining me. Is this nonsense?
Well, I know, I can't believe it. I just think, sorry, that's my son in the background. I just think it's one of those outrageous claims that just destroys PETA and all the good work that they say they're supposed to be doing. Because why on earth would you put a ban on sex if a man eats meat?
Well, it doesn't make much sense to me or their cause. But why do green organisations care so much about having less children?
Well, I think, they talk about, that's how they're going to, save the planet in their way. But I think if you listen to Elon Musk, he says that population collapse is going to be the biggest thing that we have to worry about. So we won't even get to the climate disasters because there's just not enough new people being born, and there's going to be loads of old people who aren't able to work, not many middle-aged people that are willing to look after everybody and keep the world ticking over, and too many young people that can't work yet. So telling people not to have sex and not to have more children, well, I don't think that's a very good idea, Peter. I don't think they've thought this through.
I tend to agree with you, and it sounds like your son does too, Nadia, so thank you for that. That's dating coach Nadia Essex. I think they're right on something. People should have less sex outside of marriage, absolutely. Now, joining me in the studio still is Matthew Stadland. Matthew, would you like to come in on that last conversation?
I think it's nonsense, isn't it? It's absolute nonsense. Having said that, I was very interested in researching this earlier, that I think the Liberian Civil War, possibly, and it was a brutal civil war, was apparently solved, I think it was Liberia, solved by a sex ban imposed by women. And I don't know how, I would like to look into that in more detail. I don't know how that managed to end the Civil War, but apparently it did. Look, there's a serious point nestled away in this lighter topic, and it's simply that we do need to, including me, I'm not sitting here preaching because I still eat meat. Yeah, it is your job. I still eat meat and I should eat a lot less of it. But we do, all of us need to do more, whether we're in the UK or China. People love to say, well, it doesn't matter what we do here, worry about China.
Relatively speaking, it doesn't.
But we've got to start somewhere. We all have a personal responsibility because otherwise, little Wilfred, my son, and all the other little newborn babies around the country will inherit a world that is much more difficult to live in. You think the immigration crises we've had recently are a problem. Imagine how that will be if Bangladesh goes underwater.
Interesting take, Matthew. I think we should support British farming, and for every vegan that stops eating meat, I'll eat an extra steak. But there we go. We have a statement from Peter as well, who said, we all know them, the suburban men with beer bottles in hand, brandishing tongs while cooking sausages on their expensive grills. These barbecue masters believe that they can prove their masculinity to themselves and their fellow humans through their consumption of meat, not only hurting animals, but also harming the planet. What utter fluff. Matthew, do you agree with that?
I think that we should eat less meat. I don't think we should have a sex ban. And look, it's been great being on your show, by the way. I enjoy it.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Someone who does, like you, believe in free speech. I disagree with a lot of what you do say, including what you said in some respects on transsexuals and so forth, transgender people.
Yeah.
But if you don't have voices like mine coming into the studio, if we don't engage, I'm not sure how much progress we can really make.
I'm with you entirely. That is the whole purpose of GB News. Other stations might just have whole lefty panels, anti-Brexit, Ramonas everywhere. On here, we have genuine debate and genuine discussion. And I thank you for that today, Matthew. Now, this has been Calvin Robinson on Real Britain. Thank you for tuning in. That was a political commentator on my panel there, Matthew Stadlen. He's been great and diverse, but I'm still not going to unblock him on Twitter. You've been watching us on Real Britain. Please tune in again next week, Saturday and Sunday, 2 till 4. Thank you for your company. Please tweet at GB News with your views on the show. See you next time. God bless you. Here's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be turning cloudier and windier as a band of rain pushes in from the north. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and after a fine day, it'll be somewhat cloudier by this evening, but it will stay dry with rain not expected until tonight. A similar picture in the southeast and around London as well. The cloud will have increased through the afternoon, but it will be a dry end to the day. Whilst 1 or 2 showers are possible across North Wales, further south it will stay dry this evening, turning increasingly cloudy and windy though. That's how things are shaping up across the Midlands as well. Here there may be the odd shower towards the north, whilst further south it will be dry but cloud and winds will increase. Meanwhile, in the northeast of England, we can expect a largely cloudy and blustery end to the day. There's a chance of some showery rain, most likely further west, before heavier rain arrives later. By 7 p.m, the band of rain will have cleared northern Scotland. However, heavy rain will lay across southern Scotland, bringing some heavy rain here with strong winds as well. It'll also be a wet day, end to the day, for much of Northern Ireland as that rain spreads in. The cloudy, wet and windy weather means it will stay mild overnight.